The Galactic Council's xenobiology team had been studying the Krath for 3 standard years, and in all that time, not a single researcher had managed to get within 10 meters of a cub without triggering a planetary-wide alarm response. Then Sarah Martinez arrived. She wasn't supposed to be there at all. The cargo freighter she'd been working on had suffered a critical engine failure near the Krath homeworld of Veshtar, and emergency protocols required her captain to request asylum at the nearest habitable planet. Sarah, being the ship's engineer and the only crew member who didn't mind stretching her legs, volunteered to handle the groundside negotiations for repair supplies. The Krath were an imposing species, bipedal, covered in midnight blue fur with silver striations, standing nearly 3 meters tall at full height. Their society was matriarchal, deeply protective, and notoriously isolationist. The Council had been trying to establish formal diplomatic relations for decades, but the Krath kept everyone at arm's length, literally. Sarah's first encounter with them was in the open-air market near the spaceport. She was examining what looked like a power coupling, hoping it might be compatible with her ship's outdated systems, when she heard a soft chittering sound behind a stack of cargo containers. Most species would have ignored it. The Council's own guidelines explicitly warned against investigating Krath domestic spaces without permission. But Sarah had grown up with 7 younger siblings on a colony world where mind your own business wasn't exactly practiced religion. She peeked around the container. A Krath cub, no larger than a human toddler, sat alone. Its fur was lighter than the adult's, almost powder blue, and its enormous amber eyes were wet with what Sarah instinctively recognized as tears. One of its small arms was bent at an awkward angle. "Hey there, little one," Sarah said softly, crouching down to appear smaller, less threatening. She'd learned that trick with her neighbor's skittish dog back home. The cub's ears flattened against its skull, a fear response according to the xenobiology reports she'd skimmed during the flight here, but it didn't run. Sarah slowly reached into her tool belt and pulled out a protein bar. She broke off a piece, took a bite herself to show it was safe, then held out the rest. "Hungry?" The cub's nose twitched. It chittered again, this time less distressed, more curious. That's when the mother appeared. She was massive, even for a Krath. And the sound she made was somewhere between a bear's roar and a starship's klaxon. Sarah didn't move. Couldn't move. Her hindbrain was screaming at her to run, but her forebrain knew that running from an apex predator was the fastest way to become lunch. Instead, she did something that would later be described in council reports as either brilliant or certifiably insane. She pointed at the cub's bent arm and made a splinting gesture with her hands, then pointed to her medical kit. The mother stopped mid-charge. Her head tilted, the universal gesture of confusion that transcended species barriers. Sarah moved in slow motion, retrieving her emergency medical kit. She'd patched up more than her share of injuries on freight runs. Broken bones, burns, the occasional decompression incident. Her hands were steady as she approached the cub, always keeping the mother in her peripheral vision. The cub didn't resist when she examined the arm. Simple fracture, clean break. She fashioned a splint from structural foam and bonding tape, talking the whole time in a low, soothing voice. It didn't matter that the cub couldn't understand English. Tone was everything. When she finished, the cub chirped, a sound of relief. And before Sarah could react, it had clambered up her arm and perched on her shoulder, tiny claws gripping her jacket. The mother's expression changed. Sarah couldn't read Krath facial features well, but she recognized the softening around the eyes, the relaxation of the shoulder muscles. What Sarah didn't know, couldn't have known, was that in Krath culture, allowing one's offspring to physically contact a stranger was the highest expression of trust. It meant acceptance into the family unit. It meant the stranger was no longer an outsider, but kin. Within an hour, word had spread through the entire settlement. By evening, the xenobiology team's leader, a Zenthari named Keswick, with 4 PhDs and a reputation for unflappability, was standing in front of Sarah's temporary quarters, mandibles clicking in what Sarah had learned meant extreme agitation. "What did you do?" Keswick demanded. Sarah looked up from her datapad where she'd been reviewing engine schematics. The Krath cub, she'd learned his name was something like Tiksha, was still on her shoulder, now sleeping peacefully. "I splinted a broken arm. Why? Is that illegal here?" "Illegal? No, impossible. According to 3 years of research, yes." Keswick's ocular membranes were fluttering. "The matriarch wants to see you now." "With a full honor guard." The meeting changed everything. Sarah sat in what could only be described as a throne room, carved from living rock and lit by bioluminescent fungi, with Tiksha still nestled against her neck. The matriarch, a silver-furred Krath whose age was impossible to determine, studied her with eyes that held the weight of centuries. "You are small," the matriarch said in heavily accented standard, "but your spirit is large. You did not see a research subject. You saw a child in pain." Sarah shrugged, careful not to disturb Tiksha. "I've got siblings. You see a kid hurt, you help. Doesn't matter what they look like." The matriarch's rumbling sound might have been a laugh. "The others came with instruments and protocols and forms to be filled in triplicate. You came with hands willing to help and a shoulder willing to carry burdens not your own." She leaned forward. The Krath remember such things. Within a week, the diplomatic logjam that had stymied the council for decades cracked open. Trade agreements were drafted. Cultural exchange programs were proposed. And at the center of every negotiation sat Sarah Martinez, cargo freighter engineer, with a Krath cub on her shoulder, and an entire xenobiology team treating her like she'd just solved interstellar peace. Keswick asked her once in a moment of private frustration, "How did you know what to do?" Sarah scratched Tiksha behind his ears. He loved that. "I didn't. I just treated him like I'd want someone to treat my family." Sometimes, she realized, the most advanced diplomatic strategy was the oldest one humanity had: basic decency. And sometimes, all it took to change the galaxy was letting a kid sit on your shoulder.